The music had not even finished playing when Elena Voss felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She stood at the center of the ceremony platform, her hands trembling inside Damon Ashwood's grip, the golden Luna collar resting on a velvet cushion just a few steps away. Hundreds of pack members filled the grand hall, their eyes fixed on the couple who were about to seal a bond that would unite two territories after years of tension. Elena had waited for this moment her whole life. She had trained for it, prepared for it, dreamed about it. But nothing had prepared her for what happened next. Damon let go of her hands. For a heartbeat, Elena thought it was part of the ceremony, some small tradition she had forgotten. She smiled, waiting for him to turn back to her. Instead, he walked past her, past the elders, past her own father who stood proudly near the front row, and reached for the velvet cushion. He lifted the Luna collar with steady hands, the same hands that had held hers only moments ago, and turned toward the crowd. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Bianca stepped forward from the side of the platform, dressed not in the pale robes of a guest, but in deep green, the color reserved for a Luna. Her hair was pinned the way brides wore it. Her eyes were calm, prepared, as if she had known this moment was coming for a long time. Damon fastened the collar around Bianca's neck with practiced ease, the metal clicking into place with a sound that echoed through the silent hall like a verdict. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the musicians had stopped playing, their instruments frozen mid-note. Elena stood alone on the platform, still wearing her wedding dress, still wearing the crown of white flowers her mother had placed in her hair that morning. Her mind refused to accept what her eyes were seeing. She looked at her father, hoping he would rise, hoping he would demand an explanation, but he sat frozen, his face pale, his hands gripping the edge of his chair. Damon, her voice came out smaller than she intended, barely more than a whisper, yet it carried across the silent hall. He did not look at her. Instead, he wrapped an arm around Bianca's waist, pulling her close, presenting her to the crowd, as if Elena were nothing more than a decoration that had outlived its purpose. "Pack of Ashwood," he announced, his voice steady and confident. "I present to you your true Luna." The words hit Elena like physical blows. True Luna, as if she had been a false one all along, as if the years she had spent preparing for this role, learning pack law, memorizing territory boundaries, practicing diplomacy with neighboring packs, meant nothing at all. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, quiet at first, then growing louder. Some pack members looked at Elena with pity. Others looked away, unable to meet her eyes. A few, she noticed with a sharp pain in her chest, looked satisfied, as if they had expected this outcome all along. Elena's wolf stirred inside her, a low growl building in her chest that she fought to suppress. She had promised herself she would never lose control in front of the pack, no matter what happened, but nothing had ever tested that promise like this moment. She turned to her father one last time, silently begging him to say something, to do something. He rose slowly from his seat, his jaw tight, but before he could speak, one of the Ashwood elders stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder, whispering something Elena could not hear. Her father sat back down, his eyes filled with something that looked painfully close to resignation. That was when Elena understood. This had not been a spontaneous decision. This had been planned, arranged, agreed upon by people who were supposed to protect her interests. She had walked into this ceremony as a bride, and was now standing there as a stranger, unwanted and unclaimed, in front of everyone she had ever known. Bianca's eyes finally met Elena's across the platform. There was no guilt there, no shame, only a quiet, unsettling triumph. They had been friends once, or so Elena had believed. They had trained together, shared meals together, whispered secrets to each other during long pack meetings. Elena searched Bianca's face for any sign of the friendship they once shared, and found nothing but cold satisfaction. The sound of her own heartbeat roared in Elena's ears, drowning out the murmurs of the crowd. She felt heat rising in her chest, her wolf pushing against her control, desperate to break free, desperate to run. She could not stay here. She could not stand on this platform for one more second, surrounded by people who had watched her humiliation unfold and done nothing to stop it. Elena turned and walked off the platform, her steps measured at first, each one costing her enormous effort. She kept her chin lifted, refusing to let anyone see her break. But the moment she passed through the arched doorway at the back of the hall, out of sight of the crowd, her control shattered completely. She ran. The white dress tangled around her legs as she sprinted down the corridor, past startled servants, past guards who called out her name in confusion. She tore through the heavy doors leading outside, the cool night air hitting her face like a slap, and kept running, past the gardens, past the training grounds, past the border markers that separated the ceremonial grounds from the wild forest beyond. Her wolf could not stay contained any longer. With a surge of pain and relief, Elena shifted mid-stride, her wedding dress tearing away as fur replaced skin, as 4 legs replaced 2. She ran on instinct alone, her paws pounding against the earth, carrying her deeper into the trees, away from the hall, away from the collar that should have been hers, away from the life she thought she was about to begin. She did not know how long she ran. Time lost all meaning as grief and fury propelled her forward. Branches whipped past her, the forest floor blurred beneath her paws, and still she ran, as if she could outrun the memory of Damon turning away from her, as if enough distance could erase the image of that collar closing around Bianca's neck instead of her own. Elena's lungs burned, her muscles ached with exhaustion, but she pushed through it, unwilling to stop, unwilling to think, unwilling to feel anything except the raw, primal need to keep moving. The trees around her grew denser, the ground rougher, the air colder. She had left Ashwood territory far behind, but she barely registered the change. All she knew was that she needed to keep running until the pain in her chest matched the pain in her heart. It was the smell that finally made her slow down, a scent unfamiliar and sharp, carried on the wind, warning her that she had crossed into territory that did not belong to her pack. Elena's instincts, dulled by grief but never fully silenced, recognized the danger even before her mind caught up. She had run further than she realized. She had crossed into Blackthorn territory, land ruled by a pack that had been Ashwood's rival for 3 generations. She should have turned back immediately. Every lesson she had ever learned about pack boundaries screamed at her to retreat, to return to safety before it was too late. But exhaustion had finally caught up with her, and her legs gave out beneath her at the edge of a moss-covered clearing, marked by a weathered stone that bore the Blackthorn crest. Elena collapsed onto the cold ground, her wolf form trembling with fatigue, her chest heaving with each labored breath. She had nothing left, no strength to run further, no strength to shift back, no strength to even lift her head. The last thing she registered before darkness crept into the edges of her vision was the sound of approaching footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving toward her through the trees. She heard low voices speaking urgently to one another, words she could not fully make out through the haze clouding her mind. Someone crouched beside her, and she felt a hand, careful but firm, checking for injuries along her side. She wanted to move, to defend herself, to do something other than lie there helpless on enemy ground, but her body refused to cooperate. "She's an Ashwood wolf," one voice said, tension evident in the words. "Crossed the border alone, no escort." "Alive?" asked another voice, deeper, calmer, carrying an authority that made the first speaker straighten immediately. "Yes, exhausted, but alive." There was a pause, long enough that Elena, drifting in and out of consciousness, wondered if they had left. Then the deeper voice spoke again, closer now, as if its owner had knelt beside her. "Bring her to the compound," the voice said. "I want to know why an Ashwood wolf ran straight into our territory without a fight." Elena tried to open her eyes, tried to catch a glimpse of the person giving orders with such quiet command, but her vision blurred, and darkness finally claimed her. The last sensation she felt was being lifted carefully off the ground, carried through unfamiliar trees, deeper into territory that should have terrified her. Instead, strangely, as consciousness slipped away completely, all she felt was relief. Relief that the running had stopped. Relief that she no longer had to face the memory of Damon's back turned toward her, of Bianca's collar gleaming under the ceremony lights, of her father's silence when she needed him most. Whatever waited for her when she woke up in Blackthorn territory, it could not possibly hurt more than what she had already survived that night. Hours passed in a haze of half-conscious moments. Elena felt herself being carried through winding paths, felt the temperature change as they moved indoors, felt soft fabric beneath her when she was finally set down. Voices continued around her, some urgent, some curious, all unfamiliar. She caught fragments of conversation, mentions of the Ashwood pack, questions about why their princess had run so far from home, speculation about what such an event might mean for the fragile peace between the two territories. Through it all, one voice remained steady, giving instructions, calming tensions, making decisions with quiet confidence. Elena did not know his name yet, did not know his face, but something about the way he spoke made her feel, even in her exhausted state, that she had landed somewhere important, somewhere that mattered. When she finally drifted into a deeper sleep, her body wrapped in warm blankets in a room she did not recognize, Elena's last conscious thought was not about Damon or Bianca or the humiliation she had suffered. It was about the voice that had ordered her brought to safety instead of turned away, or worse. A voice that belonged, she would soon learn, to the one man capable of turning her darkest night into the beginning of something entirely unexpected. Somewhere beyond the walls of the room where she slept, word was already spreading through Blackthorn territory that the disgraced Ashwood bride had crossed into enemy land. And somewhere in that same compound, Cale Blackthorn, alpha king of a pack that had spent 3 generations at odds with Ashwood, sat in quiet thought, turning over in his mind the opportunity that had just landed, quite literally, at his border stone. The story of Elena's humiliation was only the beginning. What came next would change the fate of 2 packs forever, and neither Damon Ashwood nor Bianca, celebrating their victory back in Ashwood territory, had any idea what they had truly set into motion. Elena woke slowly, her body sore in ways she had never experienced before. Sunlight filtered through unfamiliar curtains, casting soft patterns across a stone ceiling she did not recognize. For a moment, caught in the haze between sleep and waking, she forgot everything that had happened. Then the memories rushed back, sharp and merciless, and she sat up so quickly that her head spun. She was wrapped in a thick blanket, wearing simple clothing that was not her own, in a room that clearly belonged to someone with wealth and status. The furniture was carved from dark wood, sturdy and elegant. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, though she could not remember anyone tending it. Elena's heart pounded as the events of the previous night crashed over her all at once. The wedding, the collar closing around Bianca's neck instead of hers, the desperate run through the forest, collapsing at the Blackthorn border. She was in enemy territory. Elena scrambled out of the bed, her bare feet touching cold stone floor, and moved cautiously toward the door. Before she could reach it, it opened from the other side, and a young woman stepped in carrying a tray of food. The woman startled at seeing Elena awake and standing, nearly dropping the tray. "You're awake," the woman said, recovering quickly. She had kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. "I'm Marisol. I've been looking after you since they brought you in last night." "Where am I exactly?" Elena asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Blackthorn compound," Marisol confirmed, setting the tray down on a nearby table. "You crossed the border alone, half dead from exhaustion if I'm honest. The guards found you collapsed near the boundary stone." Elena's mind raced, trying to piece together fragments of memory from the previous night. She remembered running until her body gave out, remembered voices, remembered being carried. She did not remember agreeing to be helped, did not remember any negotiation about her fate. Why wasn't I killed? The question came out blunt, but it was the most pressing thought in her mind. Ashwood and Blackthorn had been rivals for generations. Crossing into enemy territory uninvited, especially as a member of a rival pack's inner circle, was not something that typically ended well. Marisol's expression shifted, careful and measured. "That's a question for the Alpha King, not for me. He's asked to see you as soon as you're ready." The mention of an Alpha King sent a fresh wave of anxiety through Elena. She had heard stories about Cale Blackthorn her entire life, whispered warnings from pack elders about his ruthlessness, about how he had taken control of his pack through strength and cunning after his father's death, about how he showed no mercy to those who threatened Blackthorn's interests. She had never expected to meet him, let alone under these circumstances. "I need to see him," Elena said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded, despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Marisol nodded and helped Elena into more suitable clothing, simple but well made, before leading her through the winding corridors of the Blackthorn compound. Elena took in her surroundings as they walked, noting the stark difference between this place and the Ashwood halls she had grown up in. Where Ashwood favored ornate decoration and displays of wealth, Blackthorn's compound felt purposeful, built for function and defense rather than show. Everything here spoke of discipline. They stopped before a set of heavy wooden doors, guarded by two warriors who studied Elena with unreadable expressions before allowing her through. Marisol gave her an encouraging nod and stepped back, leaving Elena to enter alone. The room beyond was a study, lined with shelves of books and maps pinned to the walls marking territory boundaries. Behind a large desk stood a man who turned as she entered, and Elena felt the breath catch in her throat. Cale Blackthorn was nothing like the monster she had imagined from years of stories. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp features that carried an undeniable presence. His eyes, a deep gray that seemed to assess everything they landed on, studied her, with an intensity that made her want to look away, and yet somehow held her gaze. There was nothing warm in his expression, but neither was there the cruelty she had expected. "Elena Voss," he said, his voice the same calm, commanding tone she remembered from the previous night. Or should I say, the almost Luna of Ashwood. The words stung more than she expected. "You know what happened. News travels fast, especially news that damages a rival pack's reputation." Cale moved around the desk, studying her with an expression she could not quite read. "Your intended mate collared another woman in front of your entire pack. That is not something easily kept quiet." Elena's jaw tightened, humiliation and anger flooding back with fresh intensity. "If you brought me here to mock me, you could have simply left me at the border. I did not bring you here to mock you." Cale's voice remained even, controlled. "I brought you here because I saw an opportunity, and I do not waste opportunities." Elena studied him carefully, trying to understand what he meant. What kind of opportunity? Cale moved closer, close enough that Elena had to tilt her head slightly to maintain eye contact. "Ashwood and Blackthorn have been enemies for 3 generations. Your former intended humiliated you publicly, breaking an alliance that was meant to strengthen his territory's political standing. That alliance is now in ruins. His pack's reputation is damaged. And you, Elena Voss, are standing in my compound, unclaimed and available." Understanding began to dawn, cold and clarifying. "You want to marry me." "I want to turn Damon Ashwood's mistake into my advantage," Cale corrected, though the distinction felt thin to Elena's ears. "A union between us would be seen as a direct insult to Ashwood, proof that even in disgrace, you found a stronger match. It would also strengthen my territory's political position considerably." Elena felt a bitter laugh building in her chest. "So I would simply be trading one political arrangement for another. Trading one man who saw me as a tool for another." Something flickered across Cale's expression, there and gone so quickly, Elena almost missed it. "I will not pretend this offer comes from anything other than strategy. I have no interest in pretending affection I do not feel. But I can promise you this, I will never humiliate you the way Damon Ashwood did. Whatever agreement we reach will be honored completely, or not made at all." Elena turned away from him, walking toward the window that overlooked the training grounds below, where warriors moved through combat drills with sharp, disciplined precision. She thought about returning to Ashwood territory, about facing her father's silence, about seeing Damon and Bianca ruling together, while pack members whispered about her humiliation for years to come. The thought made something inside her curl with dread. "If I refuse," she said quietly, still facing the window, "what happens to me?" "You are free to leave," Cale said simply. "I will provide an escort to ensure you return safely to Ashwood territory, or to wherever else you choose to go. I am not holding you here against your will." Elena turned back to face him, searching his expression for any hint of manipulation, any sign that his offer carried hidden threats beneath its calm surface. She found none, only the same steady, assessing gaze he had worn since she entered the room. "Why would you offer me a choice at all?" she asked. "Most alphas would simply use my presence here as leverage, whether I agreed or not. Because a Luna who resents her position is a liability, not an asset," Cale said. "I need a partner who chooses this path, not a prisoner who waits for the first opportunity to undermine me. Elena considered his words carefully. There was something almost refreshing about his honesty, about the complete absence of false promises or empty declarations of affection. Damon had whispered words of love to her for months, had made promises about their future together, and none of it had meant anything when the moment came to honor those words. Cale offered her nothing but truth, however cold it might be. What would happen to Ashwood, she asked, if I agreed to this? Their alliance prospects would suffer considerably, Cale said. No pack wants to align with a territory whose alpha publicly humiliates his intended mate. Your marriage to me would be seen as proof that you found strength and stability elsewhere, while Damon's reputation would carry the stain of his choice for years. Elena felt something shift inside her, grief slowly transforming into something sharper, something with purpose. She thought about Damon turning his back on her, about Bianca's cold satisfaction, about her father's silence when he should have defended her. She thought about walking back into that world as nothing, as the woman who had been publicly rejected and had no path forward except quiet humiliation. Or she could walk forward into something else entirely, something that gave her power instead of pity. I have conditions, Elena said finally, lifting her chin as she met Cale's steady gaze. For the first time since she had entered the room, something that might have been the beginning of respect flickered in his gray eyes. I'm listening. I will not be a puppet, she said firmly. If I become your Luna, I expect real authority within this pack, not just a title. I will not be paraded as a political trophy without a voice in how this territory is governed. Agreed, Cale said without hesitation. A weak Luna serves no one. I have no interest in ruling beside someone who cannot stand as an equal partner. Elena studied him for a long moment, weighing the weight of what she was about to agree to. This was not the future she had imagined for herself, not the life she had spent years preparing for. But perhaps that life had never truly existed at all, had only ever been an illusion, built on promises that meant nothing the moment they became inconvenient. Then I accept your offer, Elena said, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotions still churning beneath the surface. I will become your Luna. Cale studied her for a long moment, as if searching for any hesitation, any sign of doubt hidden beneath her composed exterior. Finding none, he nodded once, a gesture that felt more like sealing a contract than celebrating a union. Then we marry within the week, he said. The sooner this alliance becomes public, the sooner Ashwood feels its consequences. Elena nodded, though a part of her, small and quiet, wondered what she had just agreed to. She had traded one political arrangement for another, had walked from the ashes of one humiliation directly into a marriage built on strategy rather than affection. But as she left Cale's study and made her way back through the disciplined halls of the Blackthorn compound, she realized something had changed within her since the previous night. She was no longer the woman who had stood frozen on that ceremony platform, watching her future collapse in front of hundreds of witnesses. She was becoming someone else entirely, someone who understood that survival sometimes required embracing paths never imagined, and that sometimes the only way forward was directly into the heart of what everyone had once called the enemy. Word of the arrangement would reach Ashwood territory within days, and Elena found herself, despite everything, looking forward to the moment Damon and Bianca learned exactly what had become of the bride they had so carelessly discarded. News of Elena's escape spread through Ashwood territory before the sun had fully risen the morning after the wedding. Servants whispered it in the kitchens. Guards murmured it at the gates. By midday, every member of the pack knew that the bride who had been publicly humiliated at her own ceremony had vanished into the forest, and no one had been able to track where she had gone. Damon Ashwood stood in his study, staring at the map of pack territories pinned to the wall, his jaw clenched tight with frustration. Bianca sat nearby, the Luna collar still resting around her neck, though the triumphant glow she had worn during the ceremony had faded into something more guarded. She could be anywhere, Damon muttered, running a hand through his hair. The scouts lost her trail near the northern border. Does it matter where she went? Bianca asked, though there was an edge of uncertainty in her voice that she quickly tried to mask. She's gone. That's what matters. We can move forward without complications. Damon turned to look at her, and something in his expression made Bianca's confidence waver slightly. Elena's father is the head of one of our strongest allied families. Her humiliation reflects on this pack's honor, whether you want to acknowledge that or not. If she doesn't return, if something happens to her, the political fallout could unravel alliances we've spent years building. Bianca's fingers moved absently to the collar around her neck. You wanted this. You told me yourself that our bond mattered more than any political arrangement with the Voss family. I wanted you, Damon said carefully, but I did not want to destroy this pack's standing in the process. There's a difference. Before Bianca could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. One of the border scouts entered, his expression tight with barely contained urgency. Alpha, we have information about Elena Voss. Damon straightened immediately. Where is she? The scout hesitated, glancing briefly at Bianca before answering. She crossed into Blackthorn territory last night, collapsed near their border stone. Their guards found her and brought her into their compound. The room fell silent. Damon's expression shifted through several emotions in quick succession, disbelief, then something that looked almost like alarm, before settling into a carefully controlled mask. Blackthorn, he repeated slowly, as if testing the weight of the word. That's impossible, Bianca said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Why would Cale Blackthorn take in an Ashwood wolf? Their pack has hated ours for generations. He would have every reason to use her as a hostage, or worse. Unless he sees a different kind of opportunity, Damon said quietly, his mind already racing through the political implications. Cale Blackthorn was known throughout wolf territories as a calculating strategist, a man who never made decisions without carefully weighing every possible advantage. If Elena had ended up in his compound, it was unlikely to be an accident of circumstance for long. What kind of opportunity? Bianca asked, though something in her expression suggested she already suspected the answer, and did not want to hear it confirmed aloud. Damon did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned back to the scout. Has there been any further news? Any indication of what Blackthorn intends to do with her? Rumors are already spreading, Alpha, the scout said carefully. Word from within Blackthorn territory suggests the Alpha King may be considering a marriage arrangement. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had come before it. Bianca's hand dropped from the collar around her neck, her earlier triumph replaced by something closer to genuine alarm. Damon's expression, meanwhile, had gone completely still, unreadable in a way that unsettled Bianca more than any outburst of anger could have. Leave us, Damon said to the scout, who bowed quickly and exited the room, clearly relieved to escape the tension that had settled over the study. Once they were alone, Bianca moved toward Damon, reaching for his arm. This doesn't change anything between us. Whatever Cale Blackthorn does with Elena is his business now, not ours. You don't understand what this means, Damon said, pulling away from her touch, pacing toward the window that overlooked the training grounds below. If Cale marries Elena, he doesn't just gain a wife. He gains a legitimate claim to challenge our alliances, our territorial agreements, every arrangement built around her family's influence. Her father's alliance with our pack was worth more than you realize, and if Blackthorn absorbs that influence instead, our position becomes significantly weaker. Bianca's expression hardened slightly. So this was never truly about love for you, was it? All your promises, all your declarations that our bond mattered more than politics. It seems politics mattered plenty after all, now that the political consequences have become inconvenient. Damon turned to face her, his expression tired in a way she had not seen before that moment. I love you, Bianca. That has never been in question. But loving you does not mean I can ignore what happens to this pack because of choices we made together. Elena's humiliation was necessary for us to be together, but I never anticipated it would hand our rivals such a significant advantage. The words hung between them, honest in a way that felt uncomfortable, rather than reassuring. Bianca stared at him, searching for something that might ease the growing unease settling in her chest, but found only the calculating expression of a leader, assessing damage control, rather than a man comforting the woman he claimed to love. What do you intend to do? She asked finally. I need more information, Damon said, already moving toward his desk to draft messages to trusted allies. I need to know whether this marriage arrangement is confirmed, and if so, how quickly it will be finalized. If there's any way to prevent it, or at minimum to mitigate the damage it will cause, I need to identify it before Blackthorn moves forward. Bianca watched him work, a cold feeling settling in her stomach that she could not quite name. She had wanted this outcome for months, had worked carefully alongside pack elders who shared her ambitions, believing that once Damon was free of his arrangement with Elena, their path forward would be simple and celebrated. She had not anticipated that Elena's humiliation might create complications capable of threatening the very alliance she had fought so hard to secure. The elders will want answers, she said quietly. They supported this transition because they believed it would strengthen our position, not weaken it. Damon did not look up from his work. Then we will need to provide answers that satisfy them, and quickly, before this situation spirals further beyond our control. As the day wore on, more information trickled in through scouts and informants, each report confirming what Damon had feared. Elena had not simply taken refuge within Blackthorn territory out of desperation. She had met personally with Cale Blackthorn. Discussions of a formal alliance, sealed through marriage, were already underway. Some reports suggested the wedding could occur within days, a timeline that left little room for Ashwood to intervene, even if a viable strategy could be developed. By evening, Damon had gathered his most trusted advisors in the Great Hall, the same hall where Elena had stood humiliated only a day earlier. The atmosphere felt entirely different now, tense and anxious rather than celebratory. Pack elders who had eagerly supported Damon's decision to claim Bianca as his Luna now sat with grim expressions, listening as scouts confirmed the growing threat posed by an alliance between Blackthorn and the Voss family's considerable influence. "This cannot be allowed to happen," one elder said sharply, his weathered face creased with concern. A union between Cale Blackthorn and Elena Voss would shift the balance of power across every territory bordering our own. We would be surrounded by strengthened rivals on nearly every side. "What would you suggest?" Damon asked, frustration evident beneath his controlled tone. "March into Blackthorn territory and demand her return? That would violate treaty boundaries that have kept fragile peace between our packs for years. It would give Cale every justification needed to retaliate with force, and our pack is not currently positioned to survive open conflict with Blackthorn." The elder's jaw tightened, but he offered no immediate alternative. Silence stretched across the hall as the weight of the situation settled over everyone present. Bianca sat near Damon, her earlier triumph completely extinguished, replaced by growing dread, as she realized how thoroughly her moment of victory had transformed into a crisis threatening everything she had worked to achieve. "There may be another option," Bianca said quietly, drawing every eye in the hall toward her. "If we cannot prevent the marriage, perhaps we can undermine the alliance from within. Plant seeds of doubt, create tension between Elena and her new pack before their bond has time to strengthen." Damon studied her carefully, considering the suggestion. That would require patience, careful positioning. We would need eyes within Blackthorn territory, informants willing to report back on any weaknesses within their new arrangement. "I can help arrange that," another advisor offered. "We have contacts, distant relations within Blackthorn's outer settlements, who might be persuaded to share information in exchange for appropriate compensation." Slowly, a plan began to take shape within the hall, cautious and calculated, designed to weaken the threat posed by Elena's new alliance, without triggering the kind of direct conflict that would leave Ashwood vulnerable. Damon listened to each suggestion carefully, his mind working through possibilities and consequences with the same calculating precision that had made him an effective alpha. But even as the discussion continued late into the night, a quiet unease lingered beneath Damon's carefully controlled exterior. He thought about Elena, about the way she had looked at him on that ceremony platform, the raw betrayal in her eyes before she had fled into the forest. He had told himself, in the days leading up to the wedding, that her pain would fade quickly, that she would understand eventually that his heart belonged to Bianca, and that their bond had simply been a political arrangement, destined to end regardless of circumstance. He had not expected her to run so far, or so fast, that she would land directly in the hands of his fiercest rival. He had not expected the woman he had discarded so carelessly to become, within the span of a single day, a piece capable of reshaping the entire political landscape surrounding his territory. As the meeting finally concluded and pack elders departed to begin implementing the strategies they had discussed, Damon remained alone in the Great Hall, staring at the empty ceremony platform where everything had gone wrong. For the first time since choosing Bianca over Elena, a small, uncomfortable doubt began to creep into his thoughts, a question he was not yet ready to fully confront. Had he truly understood what he was giving up when he turned his back on Elena Voss? The question would haunt him in the days ahead, growing louder and more insistent as reports continued arriving from Blackthorn territory, each one confirming that the wedding between Elena and Cale was proceeding exactly as planned, moving forward with a speed that left Ashwood scrambling to respond to a threat they had never anticipated. The days leading up to the wedding moved quickly, faster than Elena had time to fully process. Blackthorn territory buzzed with quiet preparations, nothing like the extravagant celebrations that had surrounded her failed union with Damon. There were no elaborate decorations, no weeks of planning, no grand feast prepared to impress hundreds of guests. Instead, everything about this arrangement felt efficient, purposeful, stripped of any pretense of romance. Elena stood in a simple dressing room 3 days after arriving in Blackthorn territory, watching as Marisol adjusted the fitting of a deep blue gown, far different from the delicate white dress she had worn during her humiliation at Ashwood. The blue fabric was rich and elegant, but practical, without the excessive layers and embellishments that had made movement difficult during her previous ceremony. "You seem lost in thought," Marisol observed, carefully pinning fabric along the waistline. "I'm trying to understand how I ended up here," Elena admitted quietly. 3 days ago, I was preparing to become Luna of Ashwood. Now I'm preparing to marry a man I barely know, in enemy territory, for reasons that have nothing to do with affection." Marisol paused her work, studying Elena's expression carefully. For what it's worth, the Alpha King is not the monster stories make him out to be. Strict, yes. Demanding, certainly. But fair. He does not make promises he has no intention of keeping. Elena considered this, thinking back to her conversation with Cale in his study. There had been something almost refreshing about his complete honesty, the absence of false romantic declarations that had characterized her relationship with Damon. Cale had offered her a transaction, clear and defined, without pretending it was anything more than strategic alliance. "Have you served in this pack long?" Elena asked, curious despite herself about the woman who had become her closest connection in this unfamiliar territory. "My whole life," Marisol said, resuming her careful stitching. "My family has served the Blackthorn line for 3 generations. I've watched Cale grow from a young pup training under his father's harsh instruction into the Alpha King he is today." "What happened to his father?" Elena asked, remembering fragments of stories she had heard growing up about conflict within Blackthorn's ruling family. Marisol's expression grew somber. War, territory disputes that turned violent before Cale was old enough to fully take control. He lost both his father and his mother within the same season, forced to claim leadership far earlier than anyone expected. It shaped him into someone who trusts calculation far more than emotion. Elena absorbed this information quietly, feeling a small flicker of understanding for the man she was about to marry. Perhaps his cold pragmatism was not simply a personality trait, but a survival mechanism forged through loss and responsibility thrust upon him too soon. Wedding itself, when it finally occurred, felt nothing like Elena had imagined a wedding should feel. There was no music building anticipation, no crowd gathered with excited whispers. Instead, a small assembly of Blackthorn elders and senior pack members gathered in a stone courtyard as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the gathered witnesses. Cale stood waiting as Elena approached, dressed in formal dark clothing that emphasized his commanding presence. His expression remained composed, unreadable, though his gray eyes tracked her movement across the courtyard with careful attention. There was no warmth in his gaze, but neither was there the cold calculation she had feared might replace it. Instead, something more neutral, professional almost, as if he were simply confirming that the arrangement they had negotiated was proceeding as planned. The ceremony itself was brief, without the elaborate speeches and declarations that had characterized her previous attempt at marriage. An elder spoke words binding them together as mates and political partners. And when the moment arrived for Cale to place a collar around Elena's neck, sealing their bond in the traditional manner, his hands moved with steady precision. Elena felt the weight of the collar settle around her throat, cool metal against her skin, and could not help the flash of memory that surfaced, Damon's hands performing this exact gesture on Bianca instead of her. She pushed the memory away forcefully, refusing to let it diminish whatever moment she was currently experiencing, however strange and unfamiliar it felt. "It is done," the elder announced to the gathered witnesses. "Elena Voss is now Elena Blackthorn, Luna of this territory, bound to Alpha King Kale Blackthorn in alliance and partnership." There was no cheering, no celebratory applause. Instead, the gathered pack members offered measured nods of acknowledgement, respectful but reserved, clearly still assessing what this unexpected union might mean for their territory's future. Elena found herself oddly grateful for the subdued reception. She had no desire for elaborate celebration after everything she had recently endured. Kale offered his arm, and Elena took it, allowing him to guide her toward the compound's main hall, where a modest reception had been prepared. As they walked, he leaned slightly toward her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You handled that well," he said, something that might have been approval coloring his tone. No hesitation, no visible discomfort in front of witnesses who are already questioning whether this alliance will hold strong. "I've had practice controlling my expression recently," Elena said dryly. "Circumstances have provided ample opportunity." Something flickered across Kale's face, almost amusement, though it disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. "Fair point. Though I imagine this ceremony felt considerably different from your previous experience." "Considerably," Elena agreed. "Less music, fewer betrayals so far." Kale's lips twitched slightly, the closest thing to a smile she had seen from him since their arrival at this arrangement. "I intend to keep it that way. Whatever else this marriage becomes, I will not humiliate you the way your former intended did. That is a promise I make without hesitation." Elena studied his profile as they continued walking, searching for any hint of insincerity in his words, and finding none. There was something steadying about his directness, about knowing exactly where she stood within this arrangement, rather than navigating the uncertain terrain of false romantic promises that could shatter without warning. The reception that followed remained modest, but not unwelcoming. Pack members approached cautiously to offer congratulations, their words careful and measured as they studied Elena, clearly trying to determine what kind of Luna she might become. Elena responded with practiced grace, drawing on years of diplomatic training that had prepared her for exactly this kind of scrutiny, even if the circumstances surrounding it had changed entirely from what she had once expected. As the evening wore on, Elena found herself standing near a window overlooking the training grounds, watching moonlight illuminate the disciplined structures of Blackthorn territory. Kale approached, 2 cups of warm spiced wine in hand, offering one to her as he came to stand beside her. "Second thoughts?" he asked, studying her expression carefully. Elena accepted the cup, considering the question honestly before answering. "Not second thoughts about the arrangement itself, more about how quickly my entire life changed. 3 days ago, I couldn't have imagined standing here." "Change rarely announces itself in advance," Kale said, his gaze fixed on the training grounds below. "I learned that lesson far too young, when my parents were taken from me, and I inherited responsibilities I was not yet prepared to carry." "Marisol mentioned something about that," Elena said carefully, unsure how much this topic might be considered private. Kale's expression remained steady, though something in his posture shifted slightly, a subtle tension that suggested the subject still carried weight despite years having passed. "War with a neighboring territory took both my parents within the same season. I was barely old enough to lead, but circumstances did not offer alternatives. I learned quickly that survival required calculation over sentiment." "Is that why you offered me such an honest arrangement?" Elena asked. "No false promises, no pretense of affection neither of us feels." "Partly," Kale admitted, "but also because I've seen what happens when leaders build alliances on false foundations. Eventually, those foundations crumble, often at the worst possible moment. I would rather build something honest, even if it lacks the warmth people typically associate with marriage, than repeat mistakes I've witnessed destroy other territories." Elena considered his words carefully, finding herself unexpectedly drawn to the raw honesty underlying his pragmatic worldview. There was something almost comforting about partnering with someone who made no attempt to disguise his motivations, who offered clarity instead of empty declarations, destined to dissolve under pressure. Then let's build something honest, Elena said, lifting her cup slightly in a small gesture of agreement. Whatever this becomes, let it at least be built on truth. Kale studied her for a long moment, something shifting subtly in his gray eyes, before he lifted his own cup in response. Agreed. As they stood together at the window, watching moonlight settle over territory that now belonged to both of them, Elena felt something unexpected stirring beneath the exhaustion and grief that had defined the past several days. It was not affection, not yet, and perhaps it never would fully become that. But it was something steadier, something that felt like the beginning of mutual respect, perhaps even the foundation of genuine partnership. Whatever waited ahead, whatever challenges their unusual alliance might face from rival territories and skeptical pack members alike, Elena found herself, for the first time since that devastating ceremony at Ashwood, feeling something other than despair. She felt the faint stirrings of purpose returning, and standing beside the Alpha King who had offered her honesty instead of empty promises, Elena allowed herself to hope that perhaps this unexpected path might lead somewhere worth traveling after all. News of Elena's marriage to Cale Blackthorne reached Ashwood territory exactly 1 week after the ceremony took place, delivered through a formal messenger who carried the announcement with careful diplomatic language designed to establish the new alliance's legitimacy across all wolf territories. Damon read the message twice in his study, his expression tightening with each pass through the carefully chosen words. "It's finalized," he said quietly, setting the parchment down on his desk. "Elena Voss is now Elena Blackthorne, Luna of Blackthorne territory." Bianca, who had been reviewing pack accounts nearby, looked up sharply. "So quickly, we had hoped there would be more time to prevent this outcome." "Cale Blackthorne does not waste time when opportunity presents itself," Damon said, a note of grudging respect creeping into his voice despite the circumstances. He recognized the strategic value Elena represented, and moved before we could develop any meaningful countermeasure. The news spread quickly through Ashwood territory, generating exactly the kind of political fallout Damon had feared from the moment he learned Elena had crossed into Blackthorne land. Allied packs that had previously maintained cordial relationships with Ashwood began sending cautious inquiries, questioning the circumstances surrounding Elena's departure, and expressing concern about the shifting balance of power now that Blackthorne's territory had strengthened its claim through marriage. Elena's father, Alaric Voss, arrived at Ashwood territory 3 days after the announcement, his expression carrying a complicated mixture of relief and barely contained anger. He requested an audience with Damon immediately, and the tension in the room was palpable the moment he entered the study. "My daughter is alive and apparently well," Alaric said without preamble, his voice tight with controlled fury. "No thanks to the humiliation your pack inflicted upon her in front of hundreds of witnesses." Damon met his gaze steadily, though guilt flickered briefly beneath his composed exterior. "The circumstances surrounding that ceremony were unfortunate, Alaric. I understand your anger." "Unfortunate," Alaric repeated, his tone sharp with disbelief. "You collared another woman in front of the entire assembly, humiliating my daughter so completely that she fled into hostile territory rather than remain within this pack for even one more night. And now she has married our fiercest rival, an outcome that threatens every alliance our families have built over generations." "I did not anticipate that outcome," Damon admitted, choosing his words carefully. "I underestimated how far the consequences of that day would extend." Alaric's jaw tightened, his eyes carrying a coldness that made even Damon, secure in his position as alpha, feel a flicker of unease. "Elena informed me, through carefully worded correspondence delivered by Blackthorne messengers, that she considers herself fortunate to have escaped this pack when she did. She described her new arrangement as built on honesty, something she apparently found lacking here." The words landed like a physical blow. Damon had told himself, in the days following the disastrous ceremony, that Elena's pain would eventually fade, that she would find her own path forward, and perhaps even come to understand his choice, to follow his heart toward Bianca. He had not expected her to emerge from her humiliation with such clear conviction, aligning herself so firmly with his rival, that she would openly praise the arrangement over what Ashwood had offered. "What do you intend to do?" Damon asked, forcing his voice to remain steady, despite the unease building in his chest. Alaric studied him for a long moment before answering. My family's alliance with Ashwood was built on the understanding that my daughter would become Luna of this territory, securing mutual benefit for both our lines. That arrangement has been broken, publicly and completely. I see little reason to maintain the same level of support our families have previously shared. You would break alliance with Ashwood entirely? Bianca interjected, alarm evident in her voice. Alaric's gaze shifted to her, cool and assessing. You are the reason my daughter suffered such public humiliation. I owe your position within this pack no particular loyalty. The room fell into tense silence. Damon understood immediately the severity of what Alaric was implying. The Voss family's influence extended across several allied territories, and losing their support would create ripple effects far beyond the immediate loss of one family's political backing. Other packs, watching how Ashwood handled this crisis, would draw conclusions about the reliability of alliances built with Damon's leadership. We can find a way to preserve our arrangement, Damon said, though even he could hear the uncertainty creeping into his own voice. Perhaps additional guarantees, expanded trade agreements, whatever assurances would help rebuild trust between our families. There is little I want from Ashwood at this point, Alaric said flatly. My daughter has found stability elsewhere, in a territory that, ironically, we spent generations viewing as our enemy. Perhaps that says more about the current state of leadership within this pack than anything I could articulate through diplomatic correspondence. The meeting ended without resolution, Alaric departing with clear indication that the Voss family's alliance with Ashwood hung by the thinnest of threads. Once he had gone, Bianca turned to Damon, her expression a complicated mixture of frustration and growing anxiety. This is spiraling far beyond what either of us anticipated, she said. Elena's marriage isn't simply a personal matter anymore. It's becoming a political crisis that threatens everything we've built. I'm aware, Damon said tersely, moving toward the window that overlooked the training grounds, the same view he had stood before countless times since the ceremony that had set these events into motion. Cale Blackthorn moved faster and more decisively than I anticipated. He's transformed Elena's humiliation into a weapon aimed directly at our pack's political standing. Bianca joined him at the window, her hand finding his arm in a gesture meant to offer comfort, though her expression suggested she needed reassurance just as much as she hoped to provide it. What can we do to counter this? Damon was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through possibilities with careful calculation. We need to demonstrate strength, prove to our remaining allies that Ashwood remains a stable, powerful territory, despite this setback. We cannot allow this situation to project weakness, or other packs will begin questioning our position across every existing agreement. And Elena? Bianca asked carefully. Do we simply allow her new alliance with Blackthorn to strengthen unchecked? Something complicated flickered across Damon's expression, an emotion Bianca could not fully identify. We continue with the strategy you suggested. Careful positioning, information gathering. If there are cracks within her new arrangement, cracks that could be exploited to weaken the bond between her and Cale Blackthorn, we need to identify them before that alliance solidifies into something impossible to undermine. Bianca nodded, though a small, uncomfortable feeling settled in her chest that she could not quite dismiss. She had wanted Damon entirely to herself, had spent months carefully positioning herself to replace Elena in his affections and his territory's future. She had not anticipated that even after achieving her goal, Elena's presence would continue to loom over their relationship, now transformed into a political threat rather than a personal rival. That evening, alone in her chambers, Bianca found herself staring at her reflection, studying the Luna collar resting around her neck, the symbol of everything she had worked to achieve. She thought about Elena's words, relayed through Alaric's furious visit, about finding honesty in her new arrangement with Cale Blackthorn. Bianca thought about her own relationship with Damon, built on passionate declarations and carefully orchestrated circumstances designed to eliminate Elena from his life. She thought about the calculating way Damon had discussed political strategy just hours earlier, his focus entirely consumed by damage control rather than any lingering affection for what they had built together. For the first time since claiming her position as Luna, a quiet unease began to settle over Bianca, a question she was not yet ready to fully confront. Had she truly won Damon's heart, Or had she simply become another piece in his calculated approach to leadership, valuable only as long as she served his broader political interests? The thought lingered uncomfortably as she extinguished the candles in her chambers, preparing for sleep that would not come easily. Outside her window, somewhere beyond the borders of Ashwood territory, Elena Voss was building a new life, one that seemed, despite its unconventional beginning, to carry more genuine stability than the passionate romance Bianca had fought so hard to secure for herself. Whatever satisfaction Bianca had felt during that triumphant ceremony had faded considerably, replaced by the growing realization that Elena's humiliation had set into motion consequences that threatened to reshape the political landscape in ways none of them had fully anticipated. Weeks passed, and Elena settled into a rhythm within Blackthorn territory that felt entirely different from anything she had experienced growing up within Ashwood's more elaborate, tradition-bound structure. Where her former pack had emphasized appearances and ceremony, Blackthorn functioned with quiet efficiency, every member contributing meaningfully to the territory's operation, regardless of status or birthright. Elena spent her mornings observing pack meetings, learning the intricate details of how Blackthorn managed its resources, trained its warriors, and maintained relationships with neighboring territories that had not descended into open hostility. She found herself genuinely impressed by the organization underlying what she had once believed, based on years of biased stories from her own pack, to be a territory ruled through fear and brutality alone. "You seem surprised," Cale observed one morning, finding her studying territorial maps in his study, tracing the boundaries that separated Blackthorn land from neighboring packs with careful attention. "I expected something different," Elena admitted, not bothering to hide her honest assessment. "Growing up, I heard countless stories about Blackthorn's ruthlessness, tales meant to frighten young pups into obedience by warning them about the dangers lurking beyond our borders." "And now?" Cale asked, moving to stand beside her, studying the same map with the ease of someone who had memorized every line and boundary marker years ago. "Now I see discipline," Elena said honestly, "organization. A pack that functions because every member understands their role and contributes meaningfully to the whole, rather than a hierarchy built purely on birthright and appearance." Something that might have been quiet pride flickered across Cale's expression. "My father built this structure through hard lessons learned during difficult times. I've maintained it because I've seen the alternative, and I have no desire to lead a pack vulnerable to the kind of instability that comes from favoring appearance over substance." Elena studied him carefully, noticing details she had missed during their initial, more guarded interactions. The way he listened attentively when pack members brought concerns forward during meetings, never dismissing input regardless of the speaker's status. The careful attention he paid to training schedules, ensuring warriors received adequate rest alongside rigorous preparation. The quiet respect that seemed to flow naturally between him and every member of his pack, earned rather than demanded through fear. "You're not what I expected," Elena admitted quietly. Cale's gray eyes met hers, something unreadable passing across his expression. "Neither are you, if I'm being equally honest. I anticipated resentment, perhaps quiet sabotage from a woman forced into an arrangement she did not choose freely. Instead, I've found someone genuinely invested in understanding this territory and contributing to its stability." "I did choose this," Elena reminded him. "You gave me the option to refuse." "You chose the lesser evil available to you at the time," Cale corrected gently. "That's different from genuine investment, though I've noticed something shifting in how you approach your role here over these past weeks." Elena considered his observation, surprised to realize he was correct. What had begun as a strategic arrangement born from desperation and heartbreak had slowly transformed into something she found herself genuinely caring about. She had thrown herself into learning Blackthorn's operations not merely as a means of survival, but because she found the work itself meaningful, a purpose she could build for herself independent of the humiliation that had driven her here initially. Their working relationship deepened over the following weeks, moving beyond simple political necessity into something that resembled genuine partnership. Elena began attending border security meetings alongside Cale, offering insights drawn from her extensive knowledge of Ashwood's territorial strategies, knowledge that proved invaluable in strengthening Blackthorn's defensive positioning against potential threats. Your understanding of Ashwood's patrol patterns has already helped us close several vulnerabilities along our shared border, Cale told her one evening as they reviewed reports together in his study, the fire crackling comfortably in the hearth beside them. I underestimated how valuable your knowledge would prove. I spent years training for a leadership role I never actually got to hold, Elena said, a hint of dry humor entering her voice. It seems fitting that knowledge finds purpose here instead. Cale studied her for a long moment, something thoughtful crossing his expression. Do you regret it? The path that brought you here, even knowing how things ultimately unfolded? Elena considered the question seriously before answering. I regret the humiliation. I regret the betrayal from people I trusted completely, but this? She gestured around the study, encompassing the territory beyond its walls. I'm finding it difficult to regret where I ended up, even if the path here was more painful than anything I could have imagined. Something shifted subtly in the air between them, a quiet acknowledgement of the unexpected connection that had grown from their initial strategic arrangement. Cale reached for the bottle of wine resting on his desk, pouring 2 cups and offering one to Elena, a small gesture that had become routine during their evening review sessions. I lost someone once, Cale said quietly, his gaze fixed on the fire rather than meeting Elena's eyes directly. Before I became Alpha King, a woman I was meant to bond with, taken during the same conflict that claimed my parents. Elena set her cup down carefully, giving him her full attention. You've never mentioned that before. It's not something I discuss often, Cale admitted. Her name was Freya. We had been promised to each other since childhood, and I genuinely believed we would spend our lives together, leading this pack side by side. She died protecting territory during the same war that claimed my parents, and I've carried the weight of that loss for years, convinced that allowing myself to care deeply for anyone again would simply invite similar devastation. Is that why you offered me such a pragmatic arrangement? Elena asked softly, understanding beginning to bloom within her chest. Not because you're incapable of deeper connection, but because you've been protecting yourself from experiencing that kind of loss again. Elena asked softly. Cale's gray eyes finally met hers, something vulnerable flickering beneath his usually composed exterior. I've built my entire approach to leadership around calculation rather than sentiment, convincing myself that emotional distance protects both myself and this pack from the kind of devastating loss I experienced during my youth. And now? Elena asked carefully, aware that the conversation had shifted into territory neither of them had anticipated exploring. Now I find myself experiencing something I did not expect when I first proposed this arrangement, Cale admitted, his voice quieter than Elena had ever heard it. I find myself genuinely valuing your presence here, beyond the strategic advantages our alliance provides. Elena's breath caught slightly at the admission, surprised by how deeply his words resonated within her own chest. She had approached their arrangement with careful emotional distance, protecting herself from the kind of devastating heartbreak she had experienced with Damon. But weeks of genuine partnership, honest conversation, and mutual respect had slowly worn away at that protective distance, replacing it with something she had not expected to feel again so soon after her previous betrayal. I feel something similar, Elena admitted quietly, meeting his gaze steadily, despite the vulnerability the confession required. I did not expect to find genuine connection within an arrangement built on strategy and necessity, but I find myself looking forward to these evening discussions, valuing your perspective beyond simply what benefits our political alliance. The silence that followed felt charged with possibility, neither of them quite certain how to navigate the shift that had occurred between them, transforming their careful strategic partnership into something that carried the potential for genuine emotional connection. Cale set his own cup down, moving slightly closer to where Elena sat, his expression carrying a rare openness that contrasted sharply with the guarded composure he typically maintained. I want to be clear about something, Cale said carefully. I am not offering false promises or empty declarations simply because circumstances have shifted between us. But I want you to know that whatever this becomes, I intend to honor it completely, the same way I've honored every commitment I've made since you arrived in this territory. I believe you, Elena said, and found that she meant it completely. Unlike Damon's whispered promises that had crumbled the moment convenience demanded it, Cale's words carried the weight of someone who understood the true value of commitment, who had built his entire leadership philosophy around honoring exactly what he pledged, regardless of changing circumstances. As the evening continued, their conversation gradually shifted away from strategic territorial concerns toward more personal topics, shared childhood memories, hopes for the future they were building together within Blackthorn territory, quiet acknowledgement of how unexpected paths could sometimes lead toward outcomes far more meaningful than anything originally planned. Elena left Kale's study that night feeling something she had not experienced since before her devastating humiliation at Ashwood, a genuine sense of hope, carefully building from the foundation of honesty and mutual respect they had established over these past weeks. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, whatever threats their unconventional alliance might face from rival territories still processing the shifting balance of power, Elena found herself increasingly confident that she had found something within Blackthorn territory that Ashwood, despite all its tradition and ceremony, had never truly offered her at all. Genuine partnership, built on truth rather than performance, was beginning to feel like something worth protecting, regardless of whatever obstacles still waited on the horizon. The information arrived through one of Blackthorn's most trusted informants, a wolf named Corwin who had spent years cultivating relationships within neighboring territories, gathering intelligence that had repeatedly proven valuable to Kale's leadership decisions. Elena sat across from him in the study, her attention fully engaged as he laid out documents and reports he had gathered over recent weeks. "This concerns the circumstances surrounding your original wedding ceremony," Corwin said carefully, sliding a folder across the desk toward Elena. "Information my contacts within Ashwood territory have gradually pieced together, details that suggest what happened was considerably more calculated than a simple romantic betrayal." Elena opened the folder, scanning through the documented conversations and observations Corwin had compiled. As she read, a cold, uncomfortable feeling began building in her chest, replacing her initial confusion with growing clarity about events she had spent weeks trying to understand. Bianca and Damon's relationship did not develop spontaneously, Corwin continued, watching Elena's expression carefully as she processed the information. According to multiple sources within Ashwood's inner circle, several pack elders had been quietly orchestrating circumstances designed to bring the two of them together for months before your wedding ceremony took place. "Why?" Elena asked, though a part of her already suspected the answer, connections forming rapidly as she reviewed the documented evidence. "Political maneuvering," Corwin explained. "These particular elders believed that your family's alliance, while valuable, ultimately limited Ashwood's ability to expand influence into other territories. Bianca's family, though less prestigious than the Voss lineage, offered connections into regions that Ashwood had struggled to access through legitimate diplomatic channels. Breaking your engagement with Damon, replacing it with a union to Bianca, served their broader strategic interests." Elena set the folder down carefully, her hands trembling slightly as the full scope of the betrayal settled over her. "So my humiliation wasn't simply about Damon falling in love with someone else. It was engineered, calculated by people I trusted, as part of a larger political scheme I never had any knowledge of." "That appears to be the case," Corwin confirmed. "Damon may have genuinely developed feelings for Bianca over the course of their arranged proximity, but the initial circumstances that brought them together, the opportunities carefully created for them to spend time alone, the subtle discouragement of your own relationship with Damon over recent months, all of it was deliberately orchestrated." Elena thought back over the months leading up to her wedding, remembering small moments she had dismissed at the time as insignificant. Meetings with Damon that had been unexpectedly canceled, replaced by obligations that conveniently placed Bianca in his company instead. Subtle comments from certain pack elders questioning whether her more reserved personality truly suited the demands of leadership, comments she had internalized as personal criticism rather than recognizing them as deliberate psychological manipulation. "I was a pawn," Elena said quietly, the realization settling with painful clarity. "Long before that ceremony ever took place, I was already being maneuvered out of position by people who saw my engagement to Damon as an obstacle to their broader ambitions." Kale, who had been listening quietly from where he stood near the window, moved closer to where Elena sat, his expression carrying genuine concern beneath its usual composed exterior. "This changes the narrative considerably," he said thoughtfully. Your humiliation wasn't simply Damon's personal failing or Bianca's individual ambition. It was a calculated political maneuver executed through multiple coordinated efforts. Does this information help us in any meaningful way? Elena asked, looking between Cale and Corwin, her mind already working through the implications of what she had just learned. Or does it simply confirm what we already suspected about Ashwood's declining stability? It could prove considerably useful, Cale said, moving to sit beside her, close enough that Elena found the gesture unexpectedly comforting, given the difficult information she had just processed. If we can identify which elders orchestrated this scheme and expose their manipulation publicly, it would create significant internal instability within Ashwood's leadership structure. Pack members who supported Damon's decision, believing it stemmed from genuine emotional development, would react very differently upon learning the truth involved calculated political manipulation instead. Elena considered this, her analytical mind, honed through years of political training within Ashwood, beginning to work through the strategic possibilities this revelation presented. If the elders who orchestrated this scheme are exposed, it would undermine confidence in Damon's leadership as well. He either knew about the manipulation and participated willingly, which suggests deception on his part, or he remained unaware, which suggests he's easily influenced and manipulated by those around him. Neither outcome reflects well on his capability as Alpha. Precisely, Corwin agreed. This information, properly disseminated through the right channels, could accelerate the political instability already building within Ashwood territory, following your departure and subsequent marriage into our pack. Elena felt a complicated mixture of emotions as she considered the path forward. Part of her recognized the strategic value in exposing the truth behind her humiliation, understanding how it could benefit Blackthorn's position while simultaneously damaging Ashwood's already fragile political standing. But another part of her, quieter but no less present, felt genuine grief resurfacing as she processed the full extent of the betrayal she had experienced. I need some time to process this, Elena admitted, looking toward Cale for understanding rather than immediate strategic planning. Cale nodded immediately, gesturing for Corwin to gather his documents and leave them alone in the study. Once the informant had departed, Cale turned his full attention toward Elena, his usual composed demeanor softening into something more personal, more attentive to her emotional well-being, rather than purely strategic considerations. I know this must be difficult, he said quietly. Discovering that your pain wasn't simply the result of one man's changing affections, but rather a calculated scheme orchestrated by multiple people you trusted. It's strange, Elena admitted, staring at the folder still resting on the desk before them. In some ways, this makes everything easier to process. It wasn't simply that I wasn't good enough, or that Damon genuinely preferred someone else entirely on his own accord. I was deliberately maneuvered out of position by people with their own political ambitions. But, Cale prompted gently, sensing there was more beneath her words. But it also means I trusted people who were actively working against my interests for months without my knowledge, Elena continued, her voice carrying a mixture of anger and lingering hurt. Pack elders I respected, people I considered mentors during my training for leadership, were quietly working to remove me from consideration entirely, using methods I never even recognized as manipulation until now. Cale reached over, gently taking her hand in his, a gesture that had become increasingly natural between them over recent weeks, as their relationship deepened beyond simple strategic partnership. You survived their manipulation, he said firmly. Despite their calculated efforts to diminish and remove you, you emerged from that humiliation and built something genuine here, something they never anticipated when they orchestrated your public embarrassment. Elena looked up at him, finding comfort in the steady conviction behind his words. You're suggesting their scheme ultimately failed, since I ended up here instead of simply disappearing quietly into irrelevance as they likely intended. Precisely, Cale said, something fierce entering his gray eyes. Whatever their original intentions, whatever political advantages they hoped to secure through your humiliation, they inadvertently handed you directly into an alliance that now threatens everything they were trying to protect. Their scheme backfired in ways they likely never anticipated. A small, unexpected smile began forming at the corners of Elena's mouth, the first genuine amusement she had felt since learning the full extent of the manipulation orchestrated against her. There's a certain justice in that, isn't there? Their calculated scheme to strengthen Ashwood's position instead delivered me directly into the arms of their most significant rival. Justice, Cale agreed, his own expression softening into something that mirrored her small smile. And an opportunity, now that we understand the true architects behind your humiliation, to ensure their scheme ultimately costs them far more than they ever anticipated when they set these events into motion. Over the following days, Elena worked closely alongside Cale and his network of informants, carefully developing a strategy to expose the truth behind her humiliation in ways that would create maximum political instability within Ashwood's leadership, while protecting Blackthorn's own interests. The process required patience, careful timing, and strategic distribution of information through channels that would ensure the revelation reached the right audiences at precisely the right moment. Throughout this process, Elena found herself growing increasingly confident in her role as Blackthorn's Luna, her analytical skills, and deep understanding of Ashwood's internal politics, proving invaluable to the broader strategy taking shape. What had begun as painful personal betrayal was slowly transforming into a source of strategic strength, knowledge she could leverage not for petty revenge, but for genuine protection of the territory and people who had welcomed her when she had nowhere else to turn. As the strategy neared readiness for implementation, Elena felt a growing sense of purpose, replacing the lingering grief that had followed her since that devastating ceremony weeks earlier. She was no longer simply the humiliated bride who had fled into enemy territory out of desperation. She was becoming someone capable of transforming her deepest pain into meaningful strength, someone whose presence within Blackthorn territory carried genuine value beyond simple political convenience. Whatever came next, whatever consequences their carefully planned revelation might trigger within Ashwood's already unstable leadership structure, Elena felt prepared to face it, standing firmly beside Cale, as genuine partners in every sense the word implied. The weeks that followed the revelation about Ashwood's calculated manipulation brought Elena and Cale closer together than either had anticipated when they first entered their arrangement, built purely on strategic necessity. What had started as careful professional partnership gradually deepened into something neither of them had experienced before, a genuine emotional connection built on honesty, mutual respect, and shared purpose in protecting the territory they now governed together. Elena found herself joining Cale during his morning training sessions, watching as he worked alongside his warriors, offering guidance and correction with the same patient discipline he brought to every aspect of his leadership. She began participating more actively herself, drawing on combat training she had received during her years preparing for leadership within Ashwood, skills that had gone largely unused during her previous life, focused primarily on diplomatic preparation. "You're skilled," Cale observed one morning, watching as Elena worked through defensive combat forms with impressive precision. "More skilled than I expected, given how much of your training seemed focused on diplomatic responsibilities rather than physical combat." Ashwood believed a Luna should be prepared for every possibility, Elena said, slightly breathless from the exertion, but clearly enjoying the physical challenge. Diplomatic skill mattered most, certainly, but combat training was never neglected entirely. Cale moved closer, offering correction to her stance with careful, professional distance that had gradually become less rigid over recent weeks. "Your balance shifts slightly when you extend that strike. Adjust your weight distribution, like this." He demonstrated the correction, and Elena studied his movement carefully before attempting to replicate it herself. When she executed the strike correctly this time, Cale's expression carried genuine approval, something that had come to mean considerably more to Elena than she might have expected when their arrangement first began. Their growing connection extended beyond training sessions into quiet evening conversations that continued long after strategic discussions had concluded, moments where they simply talked about hopes for the future, memories from their respective childhoods, philosophical perspectives on leadership and responsibility that revealed how similarly they approached the weight of their positions despite their very different upbringings. "I never expected this," Elena admitted one evening, as they sat together near the fire in Cale's study, the same room where their strategic partnership had first begun weeks earlier. When you offered me this arrangement, I anticipated a purely political marriage, something practical, but ultimately hollow. And now? Cale asked, his gray eyes carrying warmth that had become increasingly familiar over recent weeks, replacing the guarded coolness that had characterized their initial interactions. Now I find myself genuinely caring about your well-being, about this territory's future, about building something meaningful together, rather than simply fulfilling strategic obligations, Elena said honestly, her voice carrying quiet vulnerability that she had once feared expressing after her painful experience with Damon. Cale reached over, gently taking her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them over recent weeks. I feel the same way. I built my entire approach to leadership around emotional distance, convincing myself that vulnerability invited devastating loss. But you've shown me something different, something I did not expect to experience again after losing Freya all those years ago. What changed? Elena asked softly, genuinely curious about the internal shift she had witnessed within him over these past weeks. You did, Cale said simply, his gaze steady and sincere. Your resilience, your intelligence, your commitment to this territory, despite the painful circumstances that brought you here initially. I found myself gradually lowering the barriers I had spent years constructing, allowing myself to genuinely care about someone again, despite my earlier conviction that such vulnerability would only invite future pain. The moment carried a weight neither of them had experienced during their careful, strategic beginning weeks earlier. Elena found herself leaning slightly closer, drawn toward the genuine warmth and vulnerability Cale had rarely displayed so openly before this moment. I care about you, Elena said quietly, the admission carrying genuine emotional weight rather than simple strategic acknowledgement. Not because our arrangement requires it, but because I've genuinely come to value who you are, beyond simply your position as Alpha King of this territory. Cale's expression softened further, something that might have been genuine joy flickering across his usually composed features. I care about you as well, Elena. What began as calculated strategy has become something I value far beyond its original political purpose. Their conversation continued late into the evening, moving between quiet vulnerability and genuine laughter as they shared stories from their respective childhoods, memories that revealed the people they had become, despite the difficult circumstances that had shaped both their lives. Elena found herself experiencing something she had genuinely believed impossible, following her devastating humiliation at Ashwood, authentic connection, built on mutual respect and honest emotional investment, rather than performance or political calculation. As their relationship deepened over subsequent weeks, pack members throughout Blackthorn territory began noticing the genuine warmth developing between their Alpha King and his new Luna. Whispered speculation that had initially questioned whether their arrangement would ever transform into something more meaningful gradually shifted toward quiet approval, as pack members witnessed firsthand the genuine partnership taking shape between two leaders who clearly valued each other beyond simple political necessity. Marisol, who had remained close to Elena throughout her transition into Blackthorn territory, observed this transformation with evident satisfaction during one of their regular conversations. The pack has noticed the change between you and the Alpha King, she mentioned one afternoon, helping Elena prepare for an upcoming diplomatic meeting with a neighboring territory. There's genuine warmth there now, something considerably different from the careful, strategic distance that characterized your early weeks here. Is it that obvious? Elena asked, feeling a flush of embarrassment despite herself. Obvious enough that several pack members have commented on how different Cale seems these days, Marisol said with a knowing smile. More relaxed, perhaps, less burdened by the weight he's carried since losing his parents and Freya all those years ago. The observation touched Elena deeply, understanding the significance of what she and Cale had built together over these past weeks. Not simply a political alliance designed to counter the humiliation and betrayal she had experienced at Ashwood, but genuine partnership that had gradually softened the guarded barriers both of them had constructed following their respective losses and disappointments. Their strengthening bond also translated into more effective leadership across Blackthorn territory. Elena's diplomatic training, combined with Cale's strategic pragmatism, created a leadership partnership that proved increasingly effective in navigating complex political challenges facing their territory. They worked seamlessly together during meetings with neighboring pack representatives, complementing each other's strengths in ways that impressed observers who had initially doubted whether their unconventional union would translate into effective governance. Your partnership is proving considerably more effective than anyone anticipated when this arrangement was first announced, one visiting diplomat observed during a formal gathering, watching as Elena and Kale coordinated seamlessly throughout complex negotiations regarding shared border resources. There's genuine synergy between your leadership approaches that many arranged unions never achieve. Elena and Kale exchanged a quiet, knowing glance following the comment, both recognizing the truth underlying the diplomat's observation. What had begun as calculated strategic necessity had transformed into something considerably more meaningful, a genuine partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and increasingly, authentic emotional connection that neither of them had anticipated experiencing when their unusual arrangement first began. As their relationship continued deepening, both Elena and Kale understood that their growing bond represented more than simple personal fulfillment. It represented genuine strength for Blackthorn territory, a stable, unified leadership partnership capable of withstanding whatever challenges still waited ahead, including the inevitable response from Ashwood territory, as their political rivals processed the growing threat this successful alliance represented to their own declining influence. Whatever complications still remained unresolved, whatever challenges Damon and Bianca might attempt to create as they struggled to maintain their own weakening position, Elena felt increasingly confident that the foundation she and Kale had built together, genuine partnership rooted in honesty and mutual respect, would prove strong enough to weather whatever storms still waited on the horizon. The warning came just after midnight, delivered by an exhausted scout who had run without rest to reach the Blackthorn compound before dawn. Elena was pulled from sleep by urgent knocking at her chamber door, and she found Kale already awake, standing tall and alert as the scout delivered his report with visible strain. Ashwood forces are moving toward our northern border, the scout reported, still catching his breath. A significant contingent, far larger than any routine patrol. They're claiming territorial violation, insisting that recent boundary markers have been shifted illegally in our favor. That's false, Kale said immediately, his expression hardening into the sharp, calculating focus Elena had witnessed during their earliest strategic discussions weeks ago. Those boundaries have remained unchanged for years. This is manufactured justification for something else entirely. Elena's mind raced through the implications, understanding immediately what this development likely represented. They're trying to reclaim what they lost, she said grimly. This isn't truly about boundary disputes. It's about destabilizing our alliance, creating enough chaos to weaken the political position we've built together. Or reclaiming you specifically, Kale said quietly, meeting her gaze with genuine concern beneath his controlled composure. Damon may be using this manufactured conflict as opportunity to attempt separating our alliance, believing that direct confrontation might succeed where diplomatic and political maneuvering has failed. Within hours, Blackthorn's warriors had mobilized, moving toward the contested northern border to assess the situation directly. Elena insisted on accompanying the response, drawing on months of strategic training and her own combat preparation to contribute meaningfully rather than remaining safely within the compound, while others faced potential danger on her behalf. This is dangerous, Kale said, as they prepared to depart, his concern evident despite his understanding that Elena would not be dissuaded from participating. I'm your Luna, Elena said firmly, meeting his gaze with unwavering determination. That means standing beside you during difficult moments, not hiding safely while others face danger meant to destabilize what we've built together. Kale studied her for a long moment before nodding, respect evident in his expression, despite the worry that remained visible beneath his composed exterior. Stay close to me during any confrontation. I cannot lose you, Elena, not after everything we've built together these past months. The journey toward the northern border passed in tense silence, warriors moving with disciplined efficiency through familiar territory that had suddenly transformed into potential battleground. When they arrived, Elena's breath caught at the sight awaiting them. Ashwood forces had indeed gathered in significant numbers, far exceeding what any legitimate boundary dispute would require, arranged in formation that suggested genuine intent for confrontation, rather than simple diplomatic negotiation. Daemon stood at the front of his assembled warriors, his expression carrying grim determination as Chaol and Elena approached alongside their own forces. Bianca stood near him, though her posture carried visible uncertainty that contrasted sharply with Daemon's outward confidence. "Chaol Blackthorn," Daemon called out as they came within speaking distance. "Your forces have violated agreed territorial boundaries. I've come to reclaim what rightfully belongs to Ashwood." "These boundaries have remained unchanged for years," Chaol responded, his voice carrying clear authority, despite the tension crackling in the air between the two opposing forces. "Your claim has no legitimate foundation, Daemon. We both know what this confrontation truly concerns." Daemon's gaze shifted toward Elena, something complicated flickering across his expression that she could not fully identify. "Elena," he said, her name carrying a weight she had not expected to hear from him again. "This does not need to end in conflict. Return to Ashwood, and we can resolve this territorial dispute peacefully." Elena felt something steady and resolved settling within her chest as she met Daemon's gaze directly, feeling none of the devastating heartbreak that had once defined her relationship with him. "I am exactly where I choose to be," she said firmly. "My place is here, beside Chaol, as Luna of Blackthorn territory. Nothing you say will change that reality." Something shifted in Daemon's expression, frustration mixing with what looked almost like genuine regret. "You don't understand the position your departure has created for Ashwood. Our alliances are crumbling. Our political standing has weakened considerably since you left. This confrontation isn't simply about territorial boundaries, Elena. It's about survival for everything my pack has built." "That is not my burden to carry," Elena said, her voice carrying none of the uncertainty that had once made her vulnerable to manipulation within Ashwood's political structure. "You made your choice at that ceremony, publicly humiliating me in front of everyone I once trusted. The consequences of that choice belong entirely to you and those who orchestrated it alongside you." Tension crackled through the assembled warriors on both sides, everyone sensing that diplomatic resolution was rapidly slipping away as the confrontation between Daemon and Elena carried implications far beyond simple political maneuvering. Chaol stepped slightly forward, positioning himself protectively beside Elena, while maintaining careful composure that prevented the situation from escalating immediately into open conflict. "Daemon," Chaol said, his voice carrying quiet authority that commanded attention despite its measured tone. "This confrontation serves neither of our territories well. If you genuinely believe boundary violations have occurred, we can address that through proper diplomatic channels, rather than mobilizing forces for confrontation that will only result in unnecessary conflict." "Diplomatic channels have already failed us," Daemon said, frustration evident beneath his controlled exterior. "Every attempt at negotiation has resulted in further weakening of Ashwood's position. I cannot allow this pattern to continue without taking decisive action." The standoff continued for several tense minutes, both sides remaining poised for potential conflict, while their leaders attempted, with increasingly limited success, to find resolution that would prevent bloodshed. Elena watched Daemon carefully, recognizing desperation beneath his outward confidence, understanding that his forces had been mobilized not from genuine strategic confidence, but from mounting pressure to demonstrate strength his pack desperately needed to project. It was Bianca who finally broke the tense silence, stepping forward with an expression that carried surprising vulnerability given the circumstances. "Daemon," she said quietly, though her voice carried enough clarity to reach those nearby. "This isn't the answer. Attacking Blackthorn territory over fabricated boundary disputes will only confirm every suspicion our allies already harbor about our pack's stability." Daemon turned to look at her, something complicated passing between them that suggested tensions had been building within their own relationship, far beyond what outside observers had witnessed. "What would you suggest instead, Bianca? Simply accept our declining influence while Blackthorn's power continues growing unchecked?" "I would suggest we find genuine solutions rather than manufactured conflicts destined to fail," Bianca said, her voice growing steadier as she continued. "This confrontation was never truly about boundaries. We both know that. Pursuing it further will only accelerate exactly the outcome we're desperately trying to prevent." The exchange between Daemon and Bianca revealed cracks in their partnership that had clearly been building for weeks, tension that Elena recognized immediately, given her own painful experience navigating political manipulation and shifting loyalties within Ashwood's leadership structure. Whatever passionate connection had originally drawn Damon toward Bianca appeared to be straining considerably under the mounting pressure of political consequences neither of them had fully anticipated when they orchestrated Elena's humiliation months earlier. Sensing the shifting dynamics, Cale pressed the advantage carefully, his tone remaining measured despite the tactical opportunity presenting itself. Perhaps your Luna offers wisdom worth considering, Damon. Continuing this confrontation serves no genuine purpose beyond satisfying frustration that has little connection to actual territorial concerns. Damon's jaw tightened, clearly caught between his desperate need to project strength and the growing recognition that his manufactured conflict was unraveling before achieving any meaningful objective. After several long, tense moments, he finally lowered his stance slightly, though pride prevented him from fully abandoning his aggressive posturing. "This is not resolved," he said finally, though his voice carried considerably less conviction than it had at the confrontation's beginning. "But perhaps direct conflict serves no immediate purpose today." As Ashwood forces began their measured withdrawal, Elena felt the tension slowly draining from her own body, replaced by exhausted relief that bloodshed had been avoided despite the volatile confrontation. Cale remained close beside her throughout the withdrawal, his protective presence steady and reassuring even as immediate danger began receding. "You handled that with remarkable composure," Cale said quietly, once Ashwood forces had retreated to a safe distance, their formation dissolving into the distant tree line. "I've had considerable practice facing Damon under difficult circumstances," Elena said, allowing herself a small, tired smile despite the lingering tension from the confrontation. "Though I never anticipated facing him across a potential battlefield when I first fled that ceremony months ago." Cale reached over, gently taking her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them, despite the public setting and lingering warriors still nearby. "Whatever comes next, whatever further attempts Ashwood makes to destabilize what we've built together, we face it as genuine partners. That much I can promise you completely." As they made their way back toward Blackthorn territory, Elena reflected on how far she had traveled since that devastating ceremony months earlier, transforming from humiliated bride fleeing into unknown territory, into confident Luna, capable of standing firm against confrontation, designed specifically to break the alliance she had helped build. Whatever remained unresolved between Ashwood and their own territory, Elena felt increasingly confident that the foundation she and Cale had constructed together would prove strong enough to withstand whatever challenges still waited ahead. The full truth about Ashwood's manufactured confrontation, combined with the earlier revelations about the calculated manipulation behind Elena's original humiliation, reached neighboring territories within days, spreading through diplomatic channels and informal networks alike with devastating speed. What Damon had intended as a demonstration of strength instead confirmed every suspicion Allied pacts harbored about instability within his leadership structure. Reports arrived at Blackthorn territory, detailing the growing chaos consuming Ashwood in the aftermath of the failed confrontation. Pack elders who had orchestrated the original scheme against Elena found themselves facing intense scrutiny from other territory members who felt betrayed by the calculated manipulation that had nearly triggered open conflict with Blackthorn. Alaric Voss formally severed his family's remaining alliance with Ashwood, his departure triggering several other allied families to reconsider their own continued support. Ashwood's political standing has essentially collapsed, Corwin reported during a strategic meeting several weeks after the border confrontation, presenting detailed intelligence gathered from his extensive network throughout the region. Multiple allied territories have withdrawn support entirely. Internal pack structure is fracturing as members question Damon's judgment and leadership capability. Elena listened carefully, feeling a complicated mixture of emotions as she processed the news. Part of her recognized genuine satisfaction that the manipulation orchestrated against her had ultimately resulted in consequences for those responsible. But another part of her, the part that had once genuinely cared about Ashwood's well-being during her years preparing for leadership there, felt something closer to somber reflection rather than triumphant celebration. What of Damon specifically? Kale asked, studying the reports with careful attention. Has his leadership position remained secure despite these developments? Reports suggest growing calls for his removal, Corwin said. Several senior pack members have begun questioning whether his judgment remains sound enough to continue leading during this period of significant political instability. And Bianca? Elena asked quietly, curious despite herself about the fate of the woman whose betrayal had originally set these events into motion. Their relationship appears strained considerably, Corwin reported. Sources suggest increasing tension between them as blame for the current crisis shifts back and forth. Some within Ashwood now question whether Bianca's ambition, rather than genuine romantic connection, primarily motivated her pursuit of Damon's affection in the first place. Elena absorbed this information thoughtfully, recognizing the strange symmetry of watching the relationship built through her own humiliation, now crumbling under similar pressures of political consequence and shifting loyalty. There was no genuine satisfaction in witnessing their difficulties, only quiet recognition that manipulation and calculation, rather than authentic connection, rarely provided stable foundation for lasting partnership. As weeks continued passing, Blackthorn Territory's political standing strengthened considerably in direct correlation to Ashwood's continuing decline. Neighboring territories, witnessing the effective, stable partnership between Elena and Kale, increasingly sought alliance and cooperation with Blackthorn, rather than maintaining previous relationships with an Ashwood pack, whose leadership stability appeared increasingly questionable. Our territory has grown stronger than I anticipated when this arrangement first began, Kale observed one evening, as he and Elena reviewed diplomatic correspondence from several territories, expressing interest in formalizing new alliance agreements. Your presence here, combined with the political fallout from Ashwood's failed manipulation, has transformed Blackthorn's standing considerably. We built this together, Elena reminded him gently. Whatever strategic advantages my original circumstances provided, none of this would have developed into genuine strength without the partnership we've cultivated between us. Kale's expression softened, something warm and genuine, replacing his usual composed demeanor as he studied her across the desk they had come to share during countless strategic discussions over recent months. I find myself grateful, in strange ways, for the circumstances that originally brought you here. Damon's betrayal, however painful for you personally, ultimately led towards something I never expected to experience again after losing Freya all those years ago. Elena moved around the desk, closing the distance between them, feeling the same warmth that had grown steadily between them since their careful strategic beginning months earlier. I feel the same way, she admitted. What began as devastating heartbreak transformed into something I never anticipated finding again. Genuine partnership built on honesty and mutual respect. Their relationship had evolved considerably from its calculated origins, transforming into something that pack members throughout Blackthorn Territory recognized as genuine partnership, built on authentic affection, rather than simple political convenience. Elena had fully embraced her role as Luna, contributing meaningfully to every aspect of territorial governance, while building deep, respectful relationships with pack members who had initially remained cautious about her unexpected arrival months earlier. A formal gathering was announced several weeks later, bringing together representatives from numerous territories to formally celebrate the strengthened alliance Blackthorn had built under Elena and Kale's combined leadership. The Great Hall, previously the site of careful, guarded ceremony during their original wedding, now overflowed with genuine celebration, pack members and visiting dignitaries alike gathering to acknowledge the successful partnership that had reshaped regional politics considerably. Kale stood before the assembled crowd, Elena beside him, both dressed formally for the significant occasion. Unlike their original subdued wedding ceremony, this gathering carried genuine warmth and celebration, reflecting how far their partnership had traveled since those early, careful weeks of strategic arrangement. When Elena first arrived in our territory, Kale began, addressing the assembled crowd with genuine emotion evident beneath his composed leadership demeanor, I saw strategic opportunity, a chance to strengthen our position against a rival territory that had wronged her deeply. I did not anticipate finding, within that strategic arrangement, someone whose partnership would prove essential not just to Blackthorn's political standing, but to my own life and happiness. Elena felt her eyes growing warm with genuine emotion as she listened to his words, recognizing how far they had both traveled since that first careful conversation in his study months earlier. Cale turned toward her, taking her hands in his own, his gray eyes carrying warmth and sincerity that contrasted sharply with the guarded coolness he had displayed during their earliest interactions. Elena Voss came to us in her darkest moment, humiliated and betrayed by those who should have protected her interests. Cale continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the assembled hall. But she transformed that painful beginning into genuine strength, becoming not just a strategic partner, but someone whose wisdom, resilience, and genuine care for this territory has made Blackthorn stronger than I ever imagined possible. The assembled crowd offered warm applause, genuine celebration replacing the cautious, measured reception that had characterized their original wedding ceremony months earlier. Elena looked out across the gathered faces, recognizing pack members who had grown to genuinely respect and value her contributions to their territory's governance, visiting dignitaries who had witnessed firsthand the effective partnership she and Cale had built together. I want to formally acknowledge, Cale continued, that whatever strategic advantages our original arrangement provided, what we have built together has become something far more meaningful than simple political calculation. Elena is not just my Luna in title. She is my genuine partner in every sense that matters, and I am grateful every day that circumstances, however painful their origin, brought her into this territory and into my life. Elena felt tears of genuine happiness gathering as she listened to his heartfelt declaration, understanding how completely their relationship had transformed since those early, careful weeks built purely on strategic necessity. She thought back to that devastating night months earlier, standing humiliated on Ashwood's ceremony platform, watching her entire imagined future collapse in front of hundreds of witnesses. She could never have imagined, during that darkest moment, that her desperate flight into what she believed was hostile enemy territory would ultimately lead toward genuine partnership, authentic happiness, and the kind of respect and love she had never truly experienced with Damon, despite years of preparation for that failed union. "Thank you," Elena said quietly, meeting Cale's gaze with genuine warmth and affection, "for seeing value in me when I believed I had nothing left to offer, for building something honest and genuine from circumstances that began purely from strategic necessity. Whatever challenges we still face ahead, I am grateful every day to stand beside you as your genuine partner and Luna." As the celebration continued late into the evening, pack members and visiting dignitaries alike raised their cups in genuine tribute to the partnership that had reshaped regional politics while demonstrating something far more valuable than strategic calculation alone. Elena Blackthorn, once humiliated and cast aside by a pack that had failed to recognize her true worth, now stood celebrated as the beloved Luna of the most powerful territory in the region. Her heartbreak transformed completely into genuine triumph. Somewhere beyond Blackthorn's borders, Ashwood continued struggling with the political instability triggered by their calculated betrayal, Damon and Bianca facing the mounting consequences of choices that had ultimately cost them far more than they ever anticipated when they orchestrated Elena's humiliation months earlier. But within Blackthorn territory, surrounded by genuine celebration and authentic partnership, Elena felt only gratitude for the unexpected path that had led her toward this moment. What had begun as devastating betrayal at the hands of those she trusted most had ultimately delivered her toward something far more valuable than the future she had originally imagined: genuine love, mutual respect, and a partnership built on unshakable honesty that would continue strengthening in the years ahead. The enemy she had once feared had become her greatest ally, her genuine partner, and the true love she had never expected to find again after that devastating night, when everything she believed about her future had shattered completely, only to be rebuilt into something far stronger and more authentic than anything she had lost.